Okay, let's get started here. What is this now? Week 4. We're well over halfway there, and we're going to cover pages 7 and 8 today. And actually, because we stopped short last week, we're going to start off on the bottom of page 6, and we're actually going to go over into page 9 just so that we can get this whole inspection contingency part in one shot, in one video. So we start off with paragraph number 11, waiver of contingencies. If this agreement is contingent on buyer's right to inspect and or repair the property, or to verify insurability, environmental conditions, boundaries, certifications, zoning classifications, or use, or any other information regarding the property, comma, buyer's failure to exercise any of buyer's options within the time frame set in this agreement is a waiver of that contingency, and buyer accepts the property and agrees to the release in paragraph 28 of this agreement. So basically all that means is if you elect a contingency and you have 10 days to do it, but you don't do it in that time frame, that's basically you admitting to a waiver of that. So even though you elect it, you don't have to do it, okay? Now, if your buyer doesn't do it in that time frame as a buyer agent, probably good idea to still get them to sign off on the buyer's reply, just so that you're covered, okay? Especially on the buyer agency side, okay? Any questions with that paragraph? Okay.
What would you have to sign on the buyer's reply? Just that they waived it?
That they accept.
Oh, that they accept the property. Okay, got it.
Accept, I think it's, you elect the inspections that they had elected, and then just accept the condition as set forth. Okay.
But what if they don't, what if they waive the inspections? Do you still want them to then like sign that they accept the property?
If they waived it on the contract, you don't have to, but if they elected on the contract and never set the inspections or did the inspections, it's probably a good idea to still have a reply. It's very good practice to do that, just so that you're covered. And then later on, the buyer doesn't say, well, my buyer agent didn't set the inspections for me.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why you should always do that if the timeline has passed, okay?
Hey, Kong.
Yeah.
Also, if, for instance, they miss the dates and they go past that date, let's say they had the inspections done but missed the reply to inspection.
Mm-hmm.
That clause there, that waiver, really kicks in, to be quite honest.
Exactly.
So it's important not to miss the dates.
Yep. And we're going to go over that here as soon as we get to that timeline of, the 10-5-2 that is set forth within the contract. So, yep. Paragraph 12, buyers due diligence and inspections, okay? Buyers, doesn't say anything about the sellers. This is where the buyer agent and the buyer really have to know what's going on here, as well as the seller too, in a little bit here. A couple of these numbers definitely pertain to the seller as well. But A is rights and responsibilities, okay? So number 1, seller will allow access. Okay, that's what it basically states there. Seller will provide access to insurers, representatives, and as may be required by this agreement or by mortgage lenders, to surveyors, municipal officials, appraisers, and inspectors. In addition, unless otherwise agreed, only parties and their real estate licensees may attend any inspections. Okay. Can your mother-in-law go?
No.
Right. Doesn't that kind of just say only parties and their real estate licensee? To me, parties is whose name is on the contract on this agreement of sale, and their real estate licensee is the agent may attend any inspections. Okay. So if you're going to have your father-in-law or mother-in-law or dad or mom go, or uncle, unless, if they're not the home inspector, I would ask for permission first. Okay. Number 2, buyer may make 2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections of the property for the limited purpose of determining that the condition of the property is as required by this agreement and any addenda. Highlighted, buyer's right to these inspections is not waived by any other provision of this agreement. So what that states is if you waive the home inspection and waived everything in the next page, you're still entitled to 2 pre-settlement walkthroughs, okay? Now, typically one of them is done before settlement, right before settlement, and the second one could be pretty much any time. Okay?
Hey, Colin, quick question.
Yeah.
Of course, we get a lot of people that want to do that, do a walkthrough to take some measurements and things like that. Is that permissible? The way this reads,
Yep.
I don't know.
Yep.
You're saying yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
Okay.
2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections for the condition. I mean, while they're there, they can measure for the fridge and just make sure that, you know, the seller hasn't taken out the range,
Okay. All right.
the condition set forth, right?
All right.
So, yep. Now, so some people who have waived home inspections could, the way it says there, for the limited purpose of determining that the condition of the property is required by this agreement. I mean, could you take a home inspector along for 30, 45 minutes? You know, that's a little gray area there, but you know, if both parties can agree to that and the inspection was waived and they can't back out or lose their deposit money, that could be a way to get maybe a home inspector in. Just a thought. Number 3, seller will have heating and all utilities, including fuel, on for all inspections and appraisals. So they have a gas fireplace, a propane fireplace, and there's no propane tank. Should the seller have propane there for the testing of that equipment if it's staying? Technically, yes, right? You want to make sure, especially if you're on the list agent side, when you sell a vacant home and it's winterized, just make sure the seller realizes that if there is a home inspection or an appraisal, that these utilities need to be turned back on. Okay. It's probably good practice to just have them on, period, while you're selling the house, because who wants to stay in a cold house or a hot house to look at a house? Tim Costello always said, it's, you know, when you're showing a house in the summer and it's 100 degrees inside the house, how long do you think the buyer wants to stay in that house? Okay. Number 4 is basically authorization for buyer rep to receive copy of any inspection report. All inspectors, including home inspectors, are authorized by buyer to provide a copy of any inspection report for broker for the buyer. Okay. Number 5, seller has the right, upon request, to receive a free copy of any inspection report from the party for whom it was prepared, unless otherwise stated. Seller does not have the right to receive a copy of any lender's appraisal report. So you always have these sellers that ask for a copy of the appraisal. Well, here's where it says they're not entitled to one. We have some buyer agents these days, or buyers, that don't want to share the home inspection report because they paid for it and it's their money. Well, here in the contract, it states clearly that the buyer has a right to the copy. They don't even have to request it in writing. It just says upon request. So they could text the agent, and their agent text the other agent, and that's a request, right? So anytime you get those requests and demands, this is where in the contract it states that the seller has a right to a copy of the home inspection, but they do not have a right to the appraisal unless otherwise stated and agreed upon before this contract was written or executed. Okay. All right, part B, And everybody can see the shared screen, right? Okay. Part B is who can inspect the property, okay? States here, buyer waives or elects at buyer's expense to have the following inspections, certifications, and investigations, referred to as inspection or inspections, performed by professional contractors, home inspectors, engineers, architects, and other properly licensed or otherwise qualified professionals. All inspections shall be non-invasive unless otherwise agreed in writing. If the same inspector is inspecting more than one system, the inspector must comply with the home inspection law. See paragraph 12D for notices regarding property and environmental inspections. So the only thing I want to do is have the HVAC look at, okay? And I don't hire a home inspector to do it. I hire Justin McClure from Daffler Heating and Air. Is that okay, according to this contract? Absolutely, okay. The non-invasive part. So what's an invasive inspection? That's where the home inspector has to drill in and take a peek into anything, okay? That's where they have to do damage. I wouldn't say damage, but a controlled inspection of some interior of the property. The most common one we have in this area is probably drive-it inspections. Now they can look at it from the outside, test with a water meter, do all this stuff without being invasive, but to have a true drive-it inspection, they do need to drill a tiny little hole, which they'll fill back and you won't even see it, and take a look inside within the walls to make sure that there's no mold or damage to the wood inside. So if it's invasive, you definitely need to get permission from the seller to do that, okay? And actually no home inspector will do an invasive inspection without some kind of waiver or permission in writing from the seller, okay? Part C. Part C covers every inspection below it, okay? For elected inspections, buyer will, within the contingency period stated in paragraph 13A, complete inspections, obtain any inspection reports or results, and accept the property, terminate the agreement, or submit a written corrective proposal to seller according to the terms of paragraph 13B, okay? So before I dive into these inspections, the elect and waive side, okay? When we first changed to this format, I'm not sure how it started, but it was very good practice to have the buyer initial one or the other side, okay? However, I think we sold a house in Philadelphia last year, and the buyer, one of the buyers, actually just checkmarked what they wanted to do, okay? Now, is that acceptable? Nowhere in this contract does it say the buyer has to initial next to it. So it's probably acceptable. It's probably not good practice because they could say, well, I didn't checkmark that, my agent did, okay? So by having them initial, at least in the eyes of the law, the buyer has read it and agreed to it, okay? But again, nowhere in this contract does it say buyer needs to initial in these spots, but it's probably good business practice, and I think everybody does that anyways, okay? So the first one is the home property inspections and environmental hazards, mold, etc. Buyer may conduct an inspection of the property's structural components, roof, exterior windows and exterior doors, exterior building material, fascia, gutters, and downspouts, swimming pools, okay? And I say that because a lot of people put swimming pools later on in that blank spot, but it's here. Hot tubs and spas, appliances, electrical systems, interior and exterior plumbing, public sewer systems, heating and cooling systems, water penetration, electromagnetic fields, wetlands and floodplain delineation, structure square footage, not sure if people realize that's in there. You can actually have somebody measure the property for you. Mold and other environmental hazards, and any other items buyer may select. Okay, that's a key component there. And any other items buyer may select. So chimney is not a part of outlined in writing in there, but is it acceptable according to this paragraph and how it's written?
Yes.
Yes. If buyer elects to have a home inspection of the property as defined in the home inspection law, the home inspection must be performed by a full member in good standing of a National Home Inspection Association or a person supervised by a full member of the National Home Inspection Association in accordance with the ethical standards and code of conduct or practice of that association, or by a properly licensed or registered engineer or architect. Okay. So there you go. Any questions on that, the home inspection part? Okay, good idea to kind of know what's involved so that when you explain it to the buyer, what types of inspections they're allowed and what's covered under there, in case they have any questions. Okay. Wood infestation. Buyer may obtain a written wood destroying insect infestation inspection report from an inspector certified as a wood destroying pesticide applicator and will deliver it and all supporting documents and drawings provided by the inspector to seller. The report is to be made satisfactory to and in compliance with all applicable laws, mortgage lender requirements, and or federal insuring and guaranteeing agency requirements. The inspection is to be limited to all readily visible and accessible areas of all structures on the property except fences. If the inspection reveals active infestation, buyer at buyer's expense may obtain a proposal from a wood destroying pesticide applicator to treat the property. So if there's active, that's what you do. If the inspection reveals damage from active or previous infestation, buyer may obtain a written report from a professional contractor, home inspector, or structural engineer that is limited to structural damage to the property caused by wood destroying organisms and a proposal to repair the property. Okay. So it kind of outlines active and previous damage to the property.
Hey, Colin, quick question, Colin.
Yeah.
Since you read the first one, it says any and all other inspections. So technically, I don't know, it's another gray area. If you did not elect wood infestation, you could still do that.
Right.
Without even signing or initialing elected.
Right. Well, that's one way to clean up in this multiple offer situation. You kind of can clean up the wood inspection because you can hire the home inspection to do a wood inspection, and even though it's not elected, and they can waive because of anything in the home inspection, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just cleans up the offer, one less contingency in there. Yeah. The next one is deeds, restrictions, and zonings. Okay. The buyer may investigate easements, deed, and use restrictions, including any historical preservations, restrictions, or ordinances that apply to the property and review local zoning ordinances. Buyer may verify that the present use of the property, such as in-law quarters, apartments, home office, daycare, commercial, or recreational vehicle parking, is permitted and may elect to make the agreement contingent upon an anticipated use. Okay. So my question here is, does this allow you a contingency period to change or acquire a permitted use? Okay. Let's say the property is residential and you want to use it as a Airbnb. Okay. By electing this contingency, does that allow you to do a zoning change? Anybody? Okay. in my
Or as
notes,
long as you're within your times frames, right?
well, in my opinion, the way this is stated, Bill, it's only allowing you to investigate what it currently is, okay? It doesn't allow you to change the zoning or usage. And here's the reason why I say that. There's an actual form in zip forms, form ZA, okay? And that's zoning approval contingency addendum. That is used, like, let's say if you want to go from residential to get a permit for an Airbnb, or, you know, change whatever use it is now to another use, that's the form you use, okay? And I doubt they'll come up with that form if this contingency took care of that, okay? The way I read this, and I just had this recently because I had a client that was looking to do Airbnb. I read this and it doesn't really say, it doesn't allow me a time period to make changes to the current use, okay? So it's probably good practice if you're going to go to a different use to use this addendum, which allows you a more extended period of time, because to change that use, you have to go to a lot of meetings, okay, borough meetings, and borough meetings don't just happen every day. It's like once or twice a month, usually the second week of the month and then the last week of the month, okay, they propose new business. So if you're gonna do that, if you're gonna think that this is allowing you to change the zoning, then you're gonna need like 30 to 45 days of contingency period. Well, nobody's gonna allow you 45 days of contingency period if you elected other things like the home inspection, the wood inspection, and septic inspection, let's say, okay? So again, if you're thinking about changing the use of the property, there is a separate form for that, okay? Any questions on that? Okay. Water service. Buyer may obtain an inspection of the quality and quantity of the water system from a properly licensed or otherwise qualified water well testing company, if and as required by inspection company. Seller at seller's expense will locate and provide access to the on-site or individual water system. Seller will restore the property to its previous condition at seller's expense prior to settlement. So if we can't find the well, it's on the seller to find it, okay? Next one is radon. Certified inspectors only. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but you know, it talks about having a level of 4 PCI/L liters per liters or less. Okay, I think we all know about that. Quite honestly, I don't think I've done a whole radon system or installed one or even tested one for almost 18 months now. So, okay, on-lot sewage, if applicable. Buyer may obtain an inspection of the individual on-lot sewage disposal system, which may include a hydraulic load test from a qualified professional inspector, if and as required by the inspection company. Seller at seller's expense will locate, provide access to, empty the individual on-lot sewage disposal system, and provide all water needed. It's an important statement there. Unless otherwise agreed, seller will restore the property to its previous condition at seller's expense prior to settlement. See paragraph 13C for more info. So who pays for the hydraulic load tests?
Buyer.
Well, according to this, it's kind of split, isn't it?
Oh, the seller. Yeah, if the if the seller needs to be informed that they're going to have to pay for it, but
Right.
most sellers aren't going to want to pay for it, so you should have it changed.
You have a vacant home you're selling that has a septic system. Mr. Seller, if a buyer inspects this property, you're going to have to, well, first off, they're going to have to do a hydraulic load test where they bring in a tanker of water to test the system. Now, the buyer will pay for the inspection, but since the property is vacant and you need to provide water, you're going to have to pay for the water being bought in. Usually, how much is that? Does anybody know? I think they were like $180 to $200 to bring that water in, right? Okay. So just be aware of that, because I've always had the buyer pay, but according to this, technically it's a seller.
Kong, I have a question about this.
Yeah.
So when we purchased our home, we had a hydraulic load test on our septic, and the seller paid to empty it, but then we paid for the water and for the test and everything. It was actually quite costly for the whole thing. It was around $700 to $800.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. But I'm dealing with a house right now. It's like getting ready to go into bankruptcy. Basically, it's set empty for 14 months. And the client has a septic system there. And apparently this was under contract before, but it fell apart due to the septic system, but they don't know what's wrong with the septic system. So according to this contract, if the buyers elect this, the seller actually, you're saying, has to pay for the water to be brought in?
That's how I read it. Yeah.
That agent definitely does not know that.
Yep. I would highlight it and send it to them. And then
Okay.
ask them to show you otherwise.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yep. Property and flood insurance. Buyer may determine the insurability of the property by making application for property and casualty insurance for the property to a responsible insurer. Broker for buyer, if any, otherwise broker for seller, may communicate with the insurer to assist in the insurance process. If the property is located in a specially designated flood zone, buyer may be required to carry flood insurance at buyer's expense, which may need to be ordered 14 days or more prior to settlement. Revised flood maps and changes to federal law may substantially increase the future flood insurance premiums or required insurance for formerly exempt property. So it's stating it could change at any time. Okay, buyers should know that, especially if they're like on the fringe. If you were looking at the flood map like we did a couple weeks ago, when Bill Brennan was on here, and Brooks showed you how to access the flood maps. If you're like on the fringe there, you know, that could change at any time. So buyers should be aware of that. Buyers should consult with one or more flood insurance agents regarding the need for flood insurance and possible premium increases. Okay. Property boundaries. Buyer may engage the service of a surveyor, title abstractor, or other qualified professionals to assess the legal description, certainty, and location of boundaries and or quantum of land. Most sellers have not had the property surveyed, as it is not a requirement of property transfer in PA. Okay. Any fences, hedges, walls, and other natural or constructed barriers may or may not represent the true boundary lines of the property. Any numerical representations of size of property are approximations only and may be inaccurate. So the MLS says it's 0.52, and it's really 0.51. Is this covered? Is that covered under this contract? Yes. It's on the buyer if they want to really investigate it. Okay. Lastly, lead-based paint. Just remember 1978 and before. Okay, that's the biggest thing, is they have to have that form filled out. The last one is blank. So I put in there for discussion, what other inspections can you put that's not covered? Has anybody seen anything put in there or that's not covered by?
We have done a structural engineer somebody wanted that specifically. So like a structural certification. So we've written it in there.
Okay. Is that covered under 1?
You could put your invasive inspections in there, Con.
Very good. Yep. That's
Is
a
it,
good one.
is it covered under,
Was that Kira?
was your question, is it covered under the?
Yeah, is a structural engineer's report covered under home property inspections?
Yeah, I guess it is.
Exactly.
So, okay, so here's my question then. So if they wanted a general home inspection, as we normally think of it, and a
Right.
structural engineer, could you mark that first one and have both of those people come in?
Sure.
Okay, okay. I think that's where we were thinking that since they were 2 separate people, we had to mark 2 separate inspections.
Right.
So,
Now, line 409. Inspections elected above do not apply to the following existing conditions and or items. I'm actually surprised more agents don't use and fill out this line, especially in this environment, especially if you want to do a home inspection in a competing offer situations. You can put in there that these items do not apply, like the roof needs replaced or the fridge does not work. You know, there is no plumbing, you know, that type of stuff. The only thing to keep in mind, and I started on line 411, keep in mind the lender will read this if it's on this contract, okay? So if you put in there that roof, you know, that the roof is exempt because you already know it needs replaced, well, the lender is going to see that and they might have a problem with that, okay? Maybe that's why I don't see it very often. So D, notices regarding property and environmental inspections. There's 6 of them there. 1, exterior building materials. Okay, poor or improper installation of exterior building materials may result in moisture penetrating the surface of a structure where it may cause mold and damage to the building's frame. Asbestos. Asbestos is linked with several adverse health effects, including various forms of cancer. Environmental hazards. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has a list of hazardous substances, the use and disposal of which are restricted by law. Generally, if hazardous substances are found on a property, it is the property owner's responsibility to dispose of them properly. Okay. Wetlands. Wetlands are protected by the federal and state governments. Buyer may wish to hire an environmental engineer to investigate whether the property is located in a wetland area to determine if permits for plans to build, improve, or develop the property would be affected or denied because of its location in a wetland area. Mold, fungi, and indoor air quality. Indoor mold contamination and inhalation of bioaerosols, bacteria, mold, spores, pollen, and viruses have been associated with allergic responses. And additional information, you can contact the EPA and there's their contact, okay? So again, that part D is just notices for the buyer, okay? All right, the inspection contingency, paragraph 13. Part A, the contingency period is blank days, 10 if not specified, from the execution date of this agreement for each inspection elected in paragraph 12C, okay? I know it says 10 if not specified, but I always fill it in anyways. It's always good to not leave blanks on a contract, just because somebody may go back and try to change it or whatnot. So it's important to even if it's 10, just quickly write in 10 there while you're filling this out, okay? Now, if you have a water test, and a septic test, probably a good idea to give yourself a little more than 10 days because it is harder to get those guys out. Also, sometimes if time permits and the market's on the buyer side, the buyer may want to do the home inspection first, figure out if they still want the house, then go ahead and spend the money to do a water and septic test. Okay. Part B, within the stated contingency period, 10 days, well, let's just say 10 days for the purpose of this lesson today. And as the result of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C, except as stated in paragraph 13C, number one, if the results of the inspection elected in paragraph 12C are satisfactory to the buyer, buyer will present all reports in their entirety to seller, accept the property with the information stated in the reports, and agree to the release. Okay, so number one is if the buyer accepts it, it's satisfactory. Number two, if the results of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C are unsatisfactory to buyer, buyer will present all reports in their entirety to seller and terminate the agreement by written notice to seller with all deposit monies returned to buyer according to the terms of paragraph 26. So if it's unsatisfactory and the buyer says, I'm not buying this house, 13B2 is where they get out. Okay. Number three, if the results of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C are unsatisfactory to buyer, buyer will present all reports in their entirety to seller with a written corrective proposal listing corrections and or credits desired by buyers. Okay. So again, all three of these, the first thing they say is present the report in its entirety to the seller. Okay. So does that mean?
I have a question for you, Con.
Yeah.
Because this happens all the time. In number three, what is a written corrective proposal?
Buyer's reply.
Because the buyer's reply to inspection is just literally telling them what needs to be fixed, but then everybody wants to argue about who they hired to fix it and how they fixed it,
Right.
versus the buyer providing a written corrective proposal from a contractor showing how much that contractor would charge to fix it.
Right. Yeah.
Because, you know, we've had the situations where their written corrective proposal is, you know, you need to fix the flashing on the roof. Okay.
Right.
So then the seller goes out and hires somebody to fix the flashing, and then the inspector says it wasn't done right. Whereas if the buyer would have had an estimate from a roofer and then the seller agreed to it and hired that roofer, then there'd be no argument.
Right. Yeah, we've had situations where two home inspectors are going at it. One says it's done right and another says it's not done right. Right.
Doesn't it say workmanlike manner somewhere?
Yeah.
That sticks in my mind. So that it, like Tim said, it's really a gray area.
It is.
You know, it's up to the buyer to agree, I guess, who he wants to fix it. I don't know.
So
That's why I'm saying with the written corrective proposal, if the buyer's agent would spend the time getting an actual estimate from a contractor of the buyer's choice,
mhm,
and that's submitted, and it says the seller at seller's expense to have the roof fixed by Allied Roofing, then all of a sudden, now it was the buyer's roofer that fixed it.
right. We'll call Allied later and have them sponsor this
It's just an example.
and Justin McClure.
Yeah.
So the next line here, though, let's read this. The proposal may, but not required to, include the names of a property license or qualified professional to perform the correction requested in the proposal, provisions for payment, including retests, and a projected date for completion of the corrections. Buyer agrees that seller will not be held liable for for corrections that do not comply with mortgage lender or government requirements if performed in a workmanlike manner according to the terms of the buyer's proposal. Okay. Then the sub paragraph under that lowercase a, following the end of the contingency period, buyer and seller will have blank days, 5 if not specified, for a negotiation period. During the negotiation period, 1, seller will acknowledge in writing seller's agreement to satisfy all the terms of buyer's proposal, or 2, buyer and seller will negotiate another mutually acceptable written agreement providing for any repairs or improvements to the property and or credits to buyer at settlement as acceptable to the mortgage lender. If seller agrees to satisfy all the terms of buyer's proposal, or buyer and seller enter into another mutually acceptable written agreement, buyer accepts the property and agrees to the release, and the negotiation period ends. B, if no mutually acceptable written agreement is reached, or if seller fails to respond during the negotiation period within blank days, 2 if not specified, following the end of the negotiation period, buyer will, 1, accept the property and agree to the release, or 2, terminate this agreement by written notice to seller with all deposit monies going back to the buyer. If buyer and seller do not reach a mutually acceptable written agreement and buyer does not terminate this agreement by written notice to seller within the time frame allotted in paragraphs 13b through number 3, lowercase b, buyer will accept the property and agree to the release. Ongoing negotiations do not automatically extend the negotiation period. So if you keep going back and forth between buyer and seller and you're on day 5 and you haven't come to an agreement, as a buyer agent, you need to talk to them, have a conversation with the buyer and say, we're on our last day. What do you want to do if the seller doesn't agree to this? You know, you can either extend it, and if you're going to extend it, get on the phone with the list agent and try to extend it, or just accept the property or terminate the agreement of sale.
And when we extend it, we need to extend it in writing, not
Change it
just
in
have
terms.
not a conversation.
Right. It has
So
to
we've
be
had
in
that-
writing.
You know, where people are working to try to get to an end result, and then all of a sudden, when we don't get there, now we haven't extended it. So it runs right back to the beginning where we talked about the buyer has waived their rights.
In my
So-
notes here, I have starred. When does 5 days start? Okay. And
If the
here's my
contract-
question. What if buyer only uses 7 of the requested 10 days? Okay,
Doesn't start until the 10th day.
right. The buyer technically still has a right to ask for another request on day 10, up to day 10. They haven't wavered that, okay? I wrote down buyer and seller still has 5 days after 10 days, even if buyer does not use up all 10 days. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And again, when does the 10 days start? Okay. Is it a calendar day? Is it on the day of the agreement accepted? Remember back to our first session where it says for the purpose of this contract, day 1 starts the day after the agreement of sale was executed. Okay. So again, that's why that paragraph was in there, because it kind of sets the tone for everything. Paragraph C goes into the septic system, sewage system. If a report reveals the need to expand or replace the existing individual on-lot sewage disposal system, seller may, within blank days, 25 if not specified, of receiving the report, submit a proposal to buyer. The proposal will include, but not be limited to, the name of the company to perform the expansion or replacement, provisions for payment, so negotiating on who pays for what, including retests and a projected completion date for corrective measures. Within blank days, 5 days of receiving seller's proposal, or if the proposal is provided within the stated time, buyer will notify seller in writing of buyer's choice to, 1, agree to the terms of the proposal and accept the property and agree to the release. 2, terminate and get their deposit money back. Or 3, accept the property and the existing system and agree to the release in paragraph 28. If required by any mortgage lender and or any government authority, buyer will correct the defects before settlement. Okay, so this kind of puts it on the seller or the buyer then, paragraph 3. Or within the time required by the mortgage lender and or government authority at buyer's sole expense, with permission and access to the property given by seller, which may not be unreasonably withheld. Okay, so seller can't just say, no, you're not going to have access to perform this expansion or replacement of the septic. If seller denies buyer's permission and or access to correct the defects, buyer may within 5 days of seller's denial terminate this agreement by written notice to seller with all deposit monies returning to the buyer according to the terms of paragraph 26. If buyer fails to respond though within the time frame stated in paragraph 13C or fails to terminate this agreement by written notice to seller within that time frame, buyer will accept the property and agree to a release in paragraph 28. Okay, so it's pretty it's very well outlined as to who has to do what during when, and if you don't, here's what happens. Any questions on that?
When you get into the winter months, I mean, it's really difficult to replace the system.
Yes,
I
sir.
mean, I had one years ago, I bet 7, 8 years ago. It was an older lady selling it, lived there by herself. She didn't want to fix it because it worked fine for me, you know what I mean? But the new buyer, of course, was moving in with, him and the wife and 4 kids, and there was an issue. So what we ended up doing was she wrote a check made out to the contractor that was going to replace that system in the spring for the buyer. And lo and behold, the buyer calls me in the spring and says, hey, can you just have her write that check out to me? And I'm like, no. He wanted the money because apparently it was working fine for him. I don't know. So,
Okay.
Strange situation.
Interesting. Okay. Any questions today regarding this inspection contingency? I know some of us have not done a home inspection in a year. Some of us have not received or accepted an offer with a home inspection in over a year, but it's important because one day this market will change and it will come back and home inspections will be the norm again, at least on 50% of deals, not just 10% of the deals right now. All right, next week, we are going to talk about titles and surveys and cost, as well as whatever is on page 10. So again, I think sometimes the next section, we kind of just glance over with the buyer or seller and just make sure you have clear title, that's it. But it's important to understand the details of it so that you can explain it. Again, if you have any questions on this section in a real live deal, feel free to reach out to Brooks, Tim, or myself, and we'll help you navigate through it, Seth as well. And just practice good practice. Okay. That's it.
Thank you, Kong. Very good job, and we'll see everybody next week.